Hello, good afternoon. I am Scott Maravilla. I am a law professor and administrative judge, and also a contributor to Ain't It Cool News and the blog Law in the Multiverse. And today we're going to talk about the Law of Forgotten Realms with Amy Chu. Amy, you wanted to introduce yourself further, although I doubt you need that many introductions to our audience.
Well, there's a lot of comic book writers out there, so I don't know. Yeah, I am by profession mostly a comic book writer or a graphic novelist, if you want to call it that. And I also am teaching at the Cubridge School, the famous cartooning and comics school. And I guess in terms of what I write, I've written for just about everybody at this point, but I think most people would know me for my run on Red Sonja and my mini-series Poison Ivy, Cycle of Life and Death. And I'm probably missing a bunch of stuff. But yeah, anyway, that's what I do.
I think what's interesting is that when it comes to law, the epic quests and Forgotten Realms and the world of fantasy tend to get overlooked because people think, well, there's no rules, there's no law to fantasy. But it's ripe with examples. It's just a very different kind of law. So more that we would think of in The Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins enters into a very lengthy contract with the dwarves for his quest. And that raises all sorts of issues along the way about what he's owed, finding the One Ring, and ultimately the defeat of Smaug. And I will give a quick plug that James Daly, the editor of Law in the Multiverse and co-author of Law and Superheroes, has a very in-depth discussion of these issues in Wired magazine that is readily available if you plug that into Google. And also Game of Thrones, a story that prides itself on its lawlessness, actually has its own law. Their law is just the divine right of the king and how all law flows from the king. We even have in the books, I believe it's Feast of Crows, I'm going to think of as it makes the reference to it, that once the kingdoms have kind of fallen apart and delved into civil war, they have lawlessness on the roads between them, subject to bandits, robberies, and so forth, because there's no king. The king cannot enforce his law through his knights, which I think really brings us into kind of Red Sonja, which I will right off the bat point out to you, Amy, you really must have been thinking about this when you were writing, because on at the end of issue 1, I think it's the second to last page, my Red Sonja here, unfortunately, I couldn't identify a page number, so I couldn't cite directly, but you have the exact comment, a world of new rules.
Oh, I do. Okay, cool.
Yes. So can you tell us some of the rules you were thinking that Red Sonja is going to run into?
Okay. So, it's actually interesting. So as you were saying, when you write, especially fantasy worlds, and as a writer, at least for me, I approach it with, there's got to be order to your world, even if it's a chaotic world. How do you structure that? And with this particular series, when you're taking a well-known character from the past, where she lived, in the Hyborian age, there are rules, but rules known to her. You're right. I did think about this. I just didn't really articulate it as you did. But that taking her a convenient time portal, transporting her to the present, now puts her in the classic fish out of water scenario. But now she's in another different world, and that's the world of New York City, where there are entirely different rules. Right? There are rules and laws regarding carrying weapons, as Red Sonjas want to do. She's, in her previous realm, there weren't the kind of issues and rules that you would have, versus wandering around the streets of Manhattan with a very long sword, right?
She might have teleported into the wrong state.
Yeah, well, that makes it more interesting, honestly. We could have teleported her into Texas. That would be a different story, right? Or, but New York is always. In fact, I actually pitched to LA. I thought LA would be really interesting because LA has rules, but it also has different expectations. Where if you see somebody wandering around in chainmail bikini with a sword, maybe that's okay because Hollywood, right? Or cosplay. But New York is a little bit different. And so I did think quite a bit about that. And in fact, this is probably the series where I probably consulted most with people, like in terms of her interactions, especially with law, right? When I say law, I mean law enforcement.
I mean,
what would police reaction be, right?
But you kick it off very well with the reference to the 1096 and a confrontation with the NYPD and her using basically it appears to be attempted assault with a deadly weapon against police officers.
Yeah. I had to do a bit of research. I hope I got it right. I did consult a number of sources, including NYPD. It was very convenient while I was writing. New York Comic Con was going on, and so I happened to be walking by a precinct. And I think they humored me. I don't know if they really understood that it really was writing the story. But, so there's a little bit of that in there.
They probably loved it being consulted. They probably all have your comic now.
I don't know, but I'm sure there's also sort of weird people who just say all sorts of things. I don't know if they knew or thought I was legit or not. I think somebody, but yeah. So it was fine. It's fine. Well, I hope they're reading it. I hope they liked it.
I'm not a criminal lawyer at all, so everything I know about criminal law, even in law school, I didn't even take criminal law. I took criminal procedure, which is more constitutional law. So
how can you? Wouldn't you have to take criminal law? No, that's like a specialty.
Most law schools would. I went to Georgetown, and the first year curriculum did not have criminal law; they had criminal procedure.
Oh, okay.
So
well, I was told. I mean, I'm no lawyer. I'm not. But. One of my ex-boyfriends, went to Harvard Law School, and he said he thought I would have made a good lawyer. I don't know what that was in reference to. Maybe I argue well, or maybe I argue too much. I don't know.
I think good lawyers persuade, so it may mean you're great at persuading people.
I don't know. So persuasive argument, but yeah. So yeah, I did really try quite a bit with that with the setup and. Maybe more subliminally, what happened in the story.
And one of the things that I loved about the beginning was the subway scene. So as she's tapping the rail, I had such tension because I kept looking at the picture and thinking, oh, I hope Red Sonja doesn't tap the third rail by mistake, and we end up ending right there.
That would have been no. We know we can't kill Red Sonja or anything like that. That's funny.
But in your setup, to me, there was far more tension with the rail issue than with the ultimately oncoming subway car.
Well, this is the thing, though. You have to think about it from her perspective, right? And don't forget too that she's illiterate. So, but a lot. It doesn't matter anyway. She can't read English, but she can't read. She can't read. Period. And also being in a different realm, so to speak, for her, been there, done that. Is just trying to figure out what are the rules. What are the rules of this new place? No biggie. I took a lot of, I don't want to say inspiration, but Conan did the exact same thing. I don't know if you remember, if you ever read that one, where Conan gets transported to New York. But his reactions are very, very different from Red Sonja. So I really tried to, he basically becomes a pimp, in the whole thing. I was like,
oh, I'm not familiar with that issue.
Yeah, it was really weird. First of all, he spent a good part of the time wandering the streets of New York, like, what's going on? I'm like, well, I don't believe Red. I'm not saying, Red Sonja is not, I think she's aware of rules, but she doesn't necessarily abide by them. But also, she would not be like, what is this strange place? I don't think that's really in her nature. It's not a legal thing, but it's really just so you get in the frame of mind of what would, what are the rules that she would follow? Because she does have a certain set of rules, right? As a mercenary.
Did you actually have any inspiration from Steve Gerber's Howard the Duck? Because as she's going through New York and beginning her journey and finding her friends, to me there was a lot of echoes of those comics. Well, those are heavily satirical, but I did see from some of it maybe the artistic style as well. But I did see that ability of us, the reader, to view kind of the oddities in many ways of the world through her eyes, the eyes of the ultimate outsider.
I have not read Howard the Duck. I know I should, but so I would have liked to said I was inspired. But I think that's also kind of a narrative device too. So it's more that I spent many years only until recently in New York. So that's part of it is just this desire to try to show the city from a different perspective. So now I have to read Howard the Duck. I need to,
Yeah. I read Howard the Duck as a kid, and it's very funny as my mom used to buy it for me, and she was kind of used to the Disney Donald and Mickey Mouse, and she saw, a duck, and so it must be like for kids, so I'll buy Howard the Duck. And so
I do have one issue of Howard the Duck. It's because I think that's the first appearance of Kiss, right? Am I making that up?
Did they
They had a cameo in a Howard the Duck issue. So I had actually a dealer gave it to me, but I didn't read it because I kind of like, but I'm pretty sure it was a Howard the Duck.
Yes, Kiss show up at the end of an episode that is a satire of The Exorcist. Kiss show up coming out of the body of a character, and they're I think they for one frame at the end of the issue, and I think maybe for a frame at the next one. I don't know if that's if that preceded.
Before the blood issue, right?
Yeah, the red ink blood.
And sorry, I cut you off.
Oh no, that sounds about right though. I love Howard the Duck. To me, you could only do him in the 70s. He is like a product of that era because he's the true ultimate outsider, being able to walk us through that period of time of politics and society, art, everything. And I think one of the things that I enjoyed about here, Red Sonja, is you actually go through and do drop a lot of Easter eggs throughout.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad I do try to do that with a lot of stories, but I don't know if people necessarily pick them up or not.
Well, you do it well because they're true Easter eggs, not like, let's say, you can either do them sort of more subtly. I thought The Force Awakens did a good job of dropping in some fan Easter eggs in the film that you'd get. Other times, you can overdo them so that it is so overly referenced that it breaks up the flow. But I did like you made a reference. So a character is called Asimov. So are you referencing Isaac Asimov in the?
Probably. I don't remember now because it was like I wrote that. Like I have to look at my notes. But yeah, I have a lot of stuff in there like that. And especially when I name characters, usually there's a reason I name that particular character. So like the Deja Thoris run is full of, references because you can't copy, but I think it's fun to sort of, pay homage to people or things.
Oh yeah. Is there ever any other temptations to be along the lines of like Voltaire and Candide or Dante and Inferno, where there are certain groups or characters that in pop culture you don't like, so you put them into dump them off into hell, or make them an antagonist?
Okay. So yes, of course there is. I'm very careful about that though. So that there is that, absolutely, that there is that. If you read it and you know enough history, you'll figure it out. But I don't want to be like true Easter eggs, right? I don't really want to give that away. But I mean, there's a reason why the fight takes place in the final fight takes place in Coney Island. So I don't know if you pick up on this at all. Maybe it's too oblique, right? But yeah, so there's all sorts of stuff in there.
Yeah, the only thing was vibe I was getting from Coney Island was, you know, the Warriors, Brighton Beach Memoirs.
Oh
That
yeah,
kind of
no, it
stuff.
wasn't any of that. It's definitely older than that. But yeah, there's I also, just because Coney Island is just a cool visual to have, like the boss fight, you know, in Coney Island, you know, and it gave me an excuse to go and, you know, take some reference photos and things like that.
And I like the supporting characters. The fact that also that you see, Spike is the one that runs the bar, and then her friend is who's doing her PhD at Columbia, which is very well. It's in Red Sonja's. What is the name of her tribe again? I have trouble pronouncing it.
Now you're like, I can't remember now. I just drove 5 hours, so.
Okay.
But yeah, but her, all these characters, obviously there's a reason behind all the supporting cast for, especially you know, the failed PhD. She didn't quite finish her PhD. I thought that
actually, I was shocked by that. I didn't pick that up at all, because she's 5 years on her dissertation, and PhD. I mean, so many people I know went long on them. Like 5. I mean, I know you do 2 years of college, but 5 years of dissertations is like nothing.
You thought that was nothing? I didn't want to make it too long, you know. But
and she has an office and she's teaching. She's
no. So she's it was all a little bit of a, not joke, but you know, it's I just like I like the idea of putting an academic and a librarian in a Red Sonja comic. I think it's a really nice way of balancing the characters, but also it makes sense because their specialty is in you know, Hyborian languages, you know.
That's a Hyborian.
Yeah. So because this is also the conundrum, right? Is and if we really look critically at a lot of fantasy, it's like, how do they really understand each other? Really, right? In a magical world is one thing, but she's transported here in this society where we're mostly speaking English. She shouldn't be able to understand anybody, and they shouldn't understand her. You know, so who would be a person who understood what she was saying? So that, you know, there's a lot of like, well, why is it that one cop understands her? So that was the question, right? But it totally makes sense why she can understand her, you know, because she studied the language.
Yeah, ultimately, that's why you have to bring a sense of, you know, we talk about the rule of law, and yes, there's the rule of law of our modern world that can pop up in comics like Daredevil or She-Hulk, which are intentionally setting them in that world. But you like you said, you ultimately some kind of law of the society they're in, or you're going to start breaking down into things where, it's just magic. If I can give the best example, I think of like the cop out in writing, it's the old Star Trek episodes that had a all powerful being. Like when I didn't know what else to say, they're just an all powerful being with these uncanny powers, and we don't need to explain them.
Right. I mean, that is the easy way to go, right? It's like saying, oh, well, it was just magic, you know, or retconning. Oh, it was just a dream. You know, that's I think it's much more interesting to try to work out the problem, you know. In this case, that forms the plot, you know, and this panel could really easily be called the linguistics of Forgotten Realms, right? I mean, you know, there's a structure, and there's a kind of a, I don't know, you know, a sociology, anthropology behind all of this, you know, to the extent I'm able to do it, because I'm still on deadline, right? I still got to crank out the story on time for it to still make sense, get all these supporting characters in, and hopefully make it, you know, an interesting and entertaining world.
Yeah, I think it's a misnomer that, you know, if you sit there like I really focus in on the law and what's going on in the stories, and very interested in the rules and structure. But I would never think that if you did it totally realistically exactly how law is, you're going to have a good product. You'll just probably have a very boring law school exam fact pattern. And
you could. I do believe in a certain amount of authenticity. I like that, you know, because I think that some people some people, like if you get too far away from that, you always get somebody like a lawyer. It's like that wouldn't happen, right? And sometimes it can't happen that way because it is boring. But a lot of things in real life are actually quite interesting, you know. And I think trying to stick to those laws and rules to the extent I can, you know, I just think it does make more interesting, you know.
I think where you can be authentic with law and writing is either you're grounded in a legal world and the characters are authentic. Like the type of law they practice makes sense for them for what you're putting them in. Their colleagues make sense. The court structure makes sense, but you don't have to be into the minutia of, you know, exactly how many steps to that courtroom and
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and the other one of authenticity is if your plot is driven by it. So, for example, while the Netflix Daredevil didn't go a lot in season 2 into the procedures behind the Punisher's trial, that type of setup would give a writer a chance to be a lot more detailed and authentic by process, because it's the backstory, you know, secondary story arc going on throughout, so you can have time to build in deadlines, motions, surprise, you know, testimony, you know, depositions, surprise evidence, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if Scott Maravilla wrote comics, or if he wrote Daredevil, it would be a different comic. I think you can make it interesting, but it is a different comic, and sort of sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice. You know, leaving out the minutia is not a sacrifice, but you still have to follow some logic, and in my opinion, you know, I don't know. And follow certain rules that make sense to people, because if there's certain things that happen, they're just too far outside, then again, it takes the reader out and say, well, that just wouldn't happen, you know. That just, you know, Red Sonja, that wouldn't happen in New York. That's what I'm always worried about. It's like, that wouldn't happen in New York. Like, well, actually, this would happen, man. She gets shot, you know.
Shot, arrested, taken to office.
Arrested, that would happen in New York, you know. Women shouting in a, you know, possibly strange language, waving a sword, she would be shot and arrested, right? That's completely believable.
Although you get into a different matter when you get to put Sonja in the world of Riverdale with Vampirella and the Archie gang.
Yes. Different story. Yeah, thank goodness for magic. And the Riverdale world has its own kind of set of laws, you know, the rules of Riverdale, of the Archie universe. You know, there's also unspoken rules, right? I would never kill Betty and Veronica off. Couldn't do that, right? That was actually a problem. Like, I got to kill somebody. You know, all these characters are like, there's kind of an unspoken rule, right? I'm like, I wouldn't even dare, you know, suggest that any of these people were, you know, in any way.
So is your run on Red Sonja over?
Yeah, no, it was over. So actually, Mark Russell would have been a really good person for this, because his run, he put Red Sonja kind of like in charge. She's like in charge of her realm. So yeah.
Back what I was saying, the idea that we do have a law, it's often the law of kings.
Right. Yeah, I just found I have this one here in front of me, refreshing my memory of what I did. Oh my God. Okay.
Actually, preparing to write Red Sonja, do you go back and like read the original novels? Go see the Bridget Nielsen Arnold Schwarzenegger film?
No, you know what? No. So I for something like Red Sonja, I cherry pick. It's like trying to write for Wonder Woman. Can't go back and read everything. So it's really trying to find stuff. Part of it is also just doing a search to make sure I'm not accidentally doing something that's already been done. But Holly, her name was Holly, the librarian. Oh, thank God. What was I saying? So in preparation for anything, it really depends on what the character is, and you know, I try to read like the best representation of that character in doing my research. You know, you find stuff that sometimes is maybe off continuity, stuff that fans really hated. You know, I don't necessarily need to read every single thing.
Did you were you inspired a little bit to look at, say, since you're putting Red Sonja in the modern world, to go back and try to look at a time where they really particularly grounded her, a writer grounded her in her world, like one that was very particularly medieval, particularly
There's a lot
something
of
that's yeah.
yeah, there was a lot of that already. I felt the need to do the research on when Conan did that, you know, because I wanted to make sure that that wasn't, again, because somebody would say, well, yeah, but didn't Conan do that already? I'm like, yeah, but, you know, he did it in a way that I don't see Red Sonja doing it. So I thought that would, you know, would do something that's different.
When did Conan go to New York? Was that in a comic book or?
Yeah, that was in the 70s.
Oh, okay. I always think of the 70s. I think of because I'd read like the Savage Sword of Conan, which was the magazine version. I remember reading some of Conan the Barbarian in the
I
80s.
didn't know what it was. I looked it up. I read it, and I forgot exactly what it was called. So by the way, there is. So Sonja she has done this before. This is deliberate, by the way. I knew that she had done this before because some people are like, oh, but she did that in that team up, you know, with Spider-Man. What is it?
The old Marvel team up.
Yeah. So
I didn't know she was in Marvel team up.
Yeah, she was with Spider-Man, and she did exactly that. So that's part of the joke, is that she's been there, done that, but she wouldn't remember because she possesses MJ, and you know, and this all happens, by the way, in the Metropolitan Museum, I think. So there's an epic fight there. So that's why she goes back to the museum. There's a lot of things I think are funny. I don't know if people think are funny, but you know, I just do it. I can do that because I'm a writer, right?
Yeah, it sounds like you're prepared for the really like diehard fan who can come up to you and say, "Hey, didn't Spider-Man do that?"
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
I
of
believe
course.
it was my job, you know, because diehard fans, they're fans, especially with these characters. I think it is part of my job is to bring in new writers, but to new readers, but also to make the old fans happy, you know, and that's a real balancing act. So I do think about that quite a bit because it's I don't want to say it's easy to make old fans happy. It's actually not that easy, but I do think it is important to always bring in new blood to read that character if you want that character to, you know, continue. So in increasing the fan base is very important. So I believe that for Red Sonja too.
Well, ultimately, I think Red Sonja is a good example of this. So these characters are so enduring because they are reinterpreted by every writer and by every generation that encounters them. But the way you interpret them and keep true to them is you take the material but make it your own. Yeah. So it's still Red Sonja. It has her elements, but you're just focusing on other aspects of it and bringing, you know, some of your own background, thoughts, feelings.
Whether we like it or not, as writers and as artists, that you know, part of us is in that character. That's what we bring. You know, it's very hard to sort of we all write differently. We all have different perspectives. You know, there's definitely like I very much enjoy what Gail Simone did with it, but I could never write like Gail. You know, I just don't have that voice. I have my voice. I think I have a voice. I'm not sure what my voice is actually, but you know, there is some of that, and just acknowledging that you know, and then some fans may like one particular run better than another run. That's a preference, you know. But also some things are just done better than others. You know, I mean, there is a craft to writing. There's a craft to drawing. And sometimes through no fault of anyone's, you know, maybe the deadline is, you know, this used to happen back in the day, right? You hear these horror stories of whole issues being lost on some editor's desk, and suddenly the team had to, you know, put together something in like 3 days. You know, I've never encountered anything like that now. You know, everything's on the cloud, I suppose. But you know, there's what am I trying to say? It's that, but the characters themselves also make a difference in terms of, there's some characters with attributes that just make them great characters to write or draw.
Yeah, actually, going back to Howard the Duck and Steve Gerber, you should pick him up because he was known for being late for his deadlines, and he actually devoted one of the late issues is solely devoted to complaining about his editor. And it's just this bizarre issue of something like attack from the editorial desk, and it's a typewriter, and it has nothing to do with the arc that Howard's going through, and it's really just about deadlines and writing and some as a creature trying to get Howard, but it's an issue that really actually I usually skipped over and tend to skip over because it doesn't really.
It makes sense. Yeah. I couldn't do that, and I don't think it would get approved.
They ultimately fired him from the comic. I've read that online in stories. I don't know how much of that's true, but he eventually left the comic, but then had success with Thundar the Barbarian on Saturday morning cartoons.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. It's I wouldn't be able to do that. And my editors are great. I generally have had terrific editors, but I always endeavor to turn my stuff in on time-ish.
And is there any fantasy that you read or fantasy shows or films you've enjoyed?
Oh, you mean as of late or in general or?
I guess always, because like saying, the interesting thing is, we talked about some fantasy, whether it's the Hobbit and even the film version, which went so far as to have a very detailed prop on contract.
Right.
Game of Thrones, which is pulling its own medieval and it's kind of medieval and historical worlds together to other fantasies. Anyone that jumps out at you is just good?
Well, no, this is a sad thing, because most of the time I need to be doing that, exactly what you're saying. But on the other hand, as a working professional, like I'm always writing, I'm always trying to, to make a living as a comic book writer is tough. So the amount of time I have is really allocated. As much as I would love to be playing, I have a stack of games and I have a stack of books and I have a huge list of stuff I need to watch. And I just don't seem to have any time to do that. It's literally like I actually have some scripts that are actually due right now, but you just jogged my memory because I also I like buying stuff, RPG stuff. So I keep ordering the stuff that I will never play because I just don't have enough time to get anything together and get together with people. Back when I in high school, I used to play D&D when it was super uncool. It was very uncool. Now it's super cool. But back then, especially being a girl and playing D&D, and I would DM, so nerdy, right? Like in high school in the Midwest. But that experience, I think, also helped me create, develop this whole system. Like when I'm writing for fantasy, when I'm writing for something like Red Sonja, I think that informs my perspective too, of like how I sort of approach things. And as much as I would like to do all that stuff now, like I did manage to watch Game of Thrones. That was very important. I got through that. There's a lot of stuff that I know are I am watching Lovecraft Country right now. I'm not caught up entirely, but I'm fascinated by this. And what else did I watch? I'm going to sound like a real old fart too, because a lot of stuff is really kind of like there's certain periods where I get so busy working that I miss pop culture moments that are kind of important, like, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes you just get so busy and it's like you just don't have brain capacity to handle it. And then you just miss, very important in the business of fantasy, right? I do skew more towards sci-fi than fantasy, honestly. I spent a great deal of my childhood through teen years reading fantasy, but then I switched to sci-fi. And again, super, super geeky for a girl in high school, not, now it's cool, but back then it was very uncool, very uncool.
Well, one of the things that like I said, I'm glad because I still have this one left. One of the things, again, that you wove in so well that is obviously like a nod to fans, but also kind of grounds Red Sonja so well is cosplay. The fact that Holly is a cosplayer, and to me, cosplay is at the center of the fact that, like you said, sci-fi, fantasy, the Marvel universe, all these things are now, are popular culture.
Yes, yeah.
And the biggest one I remember of growing up was anime and manga, and the response of that I'd get of like, wait, you watch cartoons? Aren't those for children? And now you see like how recognized for its art, its stories, that they have become in this country and worldwide.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, now that stuff makes money. People, oh, it's cool. It's the movies, the merchandise, and everything. It's all good. But yeah, I had to throw that in there because I again thought that would be pretty cool. Because let's face it, like a lot of the characters I write, there's some fantastic cosplayers out there, and I think it's important to recognize, them as a fan base, especially for Red Sonja. To sort of ignore that is to ignore the popularity of the character. Like Poison Ivy, you go to any convention, there's way more Poison Ivy cosplayers than there are Poison Ivy comics. The content of, I want to do some kind of like ratio. You can see the popular character by how many people want to dress up as them. And then, hopefully people on the publishing side are paying attention, that there's clearly a desire for that character in some way or form, and they're dressing as that character. So there's probably some way of doing some kind of barometer on that. There's definitely characters out there who I don't know who they are, but they're clearly very popular. Somebody should be writing more or creating more content.
So, Amy, I want to thank you for doing the program today and talking about sharing Red Sonja's world with us. Is there anything you're working on now or having coming out?
Yeah, actually, I had a book that just came out this summer. So it is also fantasy, but it's not even YA. It's what they call middle grade. So it's for like 8 to 12-year-olds essentially. But I find that a lot of the adults like it. But it is fantasy. There's mermaids. There's sea serpents, and it's actually the sequel to. Some of you may know last year, Janet Lee and I came out with Sea Sirens. So this is the sequel to that. You could see that.
It's called
Sky Island.
Sky Island.
Yeah. This is a lot of fun to write, and also we had to think about the rules of that universe too. Because you're dealing with mermaids, you can't just kind of like there are rules. And it's a kingdom. And oh wait, there's a similar theme, right? Because actually, one of the mermaids gets kidnapped in this book, and so they have to. Like Splash, right? One of the mermaid friends has to go up into Trot's world, which is Honeymoon Beach, actually, and do the rescue. So it's another example where you have a fantasy character who's transported to real life, which is the world we know. Where also similarly, she doesn't understand basic things like what the heck are buses? What is this transport? On a road, so she has to learn a lot of things too. And and also coincidentally, a lot of this takes place in amusement parks. So maybe I also have some kind of theme in there that I feel like I need to replicate. But yeah, this just came out, so it's probably more age suitable for younger people than perhaps Red Sonja. My Red Sonja is fairly PG-13, but probably not really for an 8-year-old.
Yeah, but I'm sure the adventures of Trot, and is it Trot and Captain Bill?
It's Trot and Captain. Yeah, Captain Bill is her cat. So.
That's right. Yeah. Trot and Captain Bill. I'm sure it's very magical that you can enjoy at all ages.
Yes, exactly. It's definitely intended for that. So thanks for letting me plug that.
Right, well, thank you for doing the show.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Please follow us. I don't know, Scott, are you on social media? Maybe I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. My Facebook is I Write Comics because I want to make it clear I don't actually draw. I would love to draw, but you don't want me drawing. So thanks.